All right, so this is the review on how to solve quadratics. Now, I do want to say that there are several different ways to solve quadratics, and there's not really a, I don't know, most correct way, other than sometimes solving it certain ways makes your life a lot easier. And then there are various questions that, like, you can only solve one way or another. But if a if something can factor, you can solve it by factoring. You could always use the quadratic equation. If something doesn't have a b value, you can solve using square roots. I mean, just various different things. So I'm going to start by reminding you that ax squared plus bx plus c is the typical way we draw quadratics. Okay, now notice this has, I'm going to say no b. Okay, and because of that, I can solve using square roots. Okay, so I can just add the 4 to both sides. So x squared equals 4. Okay, now to get x by itself, I can take the square root and the square root. Okay, but when I take the square root of this, I have to do plus or minus, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, so when I take the square root of x squared, I get x equals, well, the square root of 4 is 2, so this is just plus or minus 2. So I can say x equals 2 or x equals negative 2. Okay, now, why is this plus or minus? Well, we're asking what times itself is equal to 4. Well, 2 times 2 equals to 4, but also negative 2 times negative 2 is equal to 4, which is why this is plus or minus. Okay, now let's look at example 2. Now, generally speaking, when I solve these, if it has a b value, I'm not using square roots. I want to make it all equal to 0. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, I get x squared plus 20x minus 5 is equal to 0. Okay, now, first thing I always do is I look to see if I can factor it. Okay, do I have two numbers that multiply to a times c, which is negative 5, that add to 20? Okay, no, there's no two set of numbers that this will happen. So I cannot use factoring. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the quadratic formula. Now, quadratic formula, in order to use that, it has to be equal to 0, which I have. Okay, but I do want you to know that if it's not equal to 0, you have to make it be equal to 0. Okay, and the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, well, if I look at this, my a is the number in front of my x squared, which is just 1. My b is 20, and my c is negative 5. Okay, so when I plug it all in, I get negative 20 plus or minus square root of, well, it's b squared minus 4ac, so 20 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5 all over 2a. Okay, well, this is just negative 20 plus or minus. Okay, 20 squared is 400. So square root of 400. A negative and a negative make a positive. 4 times 5 times 1 is 20. All over 2 times 1 is 2. So this is negative 20 plus or minus square root of 420 over 2. And once again, this plus or minus comes from the plus or minus up top too. Okay. Well, let's see if we can simplify 420. Okay, so 420. We know 2 goes into it 210 times. 2 goes into that, 105. 5 goes into that, what, 21 times? 7, 3, 3, 1. So all we have is a pair of 2's. And we have 5 times 7 times 3 on the inside. So 5 times 7 times 3 on the inside is 105. all over 2. Okay, well, because each of these can be divided by 2, so 2 and 2, if I divide 2 out by both of that, that's negative 10 plus or minus 1, or I don't have to write it, just square root of 105. Okay, so I could say x equals negative 10 plus square root of 105, x equals negative 10 minus square root of 105, and those are my answers. Okay, or you can just leave it like this too, that's fine. All right, so let's look at example 3. Okay, well, I have it equal to 0, which is what I like. Now, my first goal is always to see if it factors. You may not realize it now, but as you get further into this class, you're going to realize factoring is the easiest. Okay, you're less likely to make a mistake and it's quicker. So, two numbers that multiply to a times c. Well, our a is 3, our c is negative 14. So 3 times negative 14 is negative 42. So two numbers that multiply to negative 42, that add to b, which is a negative 1. Okay, well, luckily for us, doesn't negative 7 and positive 6 satisfy that? So negative 7 times positive 6 is negative 42. Negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. So we can rewrite this as 3x squared, and once again, we're going to change this to include these. So minus 7x plus 6x minus 14 equals 0. Okay, well, now I can put it in the box. 3x squared minus 7x plus 6x minus 14. And we have, if I look here, my greatest common factor, I can pull out a 3 and I can pull out an x. Okay, and then I want to go to individually. Well, if this is 3x squared and this is 3x, this has to be an x. This is negative 7x, this is x, this has to be a negative 7. This has to be a 2 to make this 6x, and if everything's right, negative 7 times positive 2 is a negative 14. Okay, so I can change this to 3x minus 7 times x plus 2 equals 0. I want you to think, when's the only time I can multiply two numbers? Okay, so what's in parentheses is going to be a number, what's in parentheses is going to be a number, and it's going to equal 0. The only time that will ever happen is when one of them is equal to 0. Okay, so now I want to say, all right, well, when is 3x minus 7, when does that equal to 0? Because when that equals 0, this is equal to 0, which will make this 0. Well, simple algebra. So 3x equals 7. X is 7/3. Okay, or when is this equal to 0? Subtract 2 on both sides, you get x is negative 2. So here are your two solutions. All right, last but not least, let's look at example 4. Okay, notice that I have something in parentheses here and it's squared. Okay, now you can FOIL this out, but you're creating a lot more work for yourself than you need to. Okay, we can deal with this squared using square roots, but we can't do it until we get rid of this 2. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to divide this side by 2 to get rid of that 2. But if I divide by 2 on the left, I have to divide by 2 on the right. So here I'm left with x plus 6 squared equals 25. Okay, now I can take the square root. So this is square root, this is square root. Don't forget the plus or minus. Okay, so when I square root this, the square and the square root basically cancel each other out. So I'm left with x plus 6 equals plus or minus 25. Okay, well, let's make our lives easier. That means x plus 6 equals positive 25 and x plus 6 equals negative 25. Okay, then I want to solve. So minus 6, I get x 19. Minus 6 minus 6, x equals negative 31. So I have x is equal to 19 and negative 31. and there's your solution.